April 20th, 1943, North Atlantic, 400 miles south of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke stood in the conning tower of U-515, watching through his periscope as the American destroyer escort USS England adjusted her course, heading directly toward his position. The hydrophone operator's voice cracked with tension as he reported the unmistakable sound signature. High-speed screws, multiple contacts, closing fast. Henke had survived 22 war patrols, had sent over 20 ships to the bottom, had evaded British corvettes, Canadian frigates, and Royal Navy destroyers, with a combination of skill and audacity that had earned him the Knight's Cross. But in this moment, watching the American destroyer's bow wave grow larger in his lens, he felt something he had never experienced before in all his years at sea, genuine paralyzing fear. What none of the German submarine commanders knew in the spring of 1943 was that they were facing a new breed of warship, crewed by men who had turned anti-submarine warfare into a precise science, armed with weapons that seemed to defy the very laws of physics, and driven by a relentless determination that would transform the Atlantic Ocean from a battlefield into a graveyard for the Kriegsmarine's most elite force. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The psychological transformation of German U-boat crews from confident predators to terrified prey began not with a single catastrophic defeat, but with a series of encounters that shattered every assumption they held about submarine warfare. For 4 years, from 1939 through early 1943, U-boat commanders had operated under a simple tactical principle. A submerged submarine was nearly impossible to find, and a submarine on the surface at night was effectively invisible. American destroyers and destroyer escorts demolished both assumptions with a thoroughness that left German submariners questioning their training, their tactics, and ultimately their chances of survival. The destroyer escorts that rolled off American production lines, beginning in late 1942, represented more than just new ships. They embodied a fundamental reimagining of anti-submarine warfare that German naval planners had failed to anticipate. These vessels, smaller and less expensive than fleet destroyers, were specifically designed for one purpose: hunting submarines. USS England, USS Buckley, USS Reuben James, USS Samuel B. Roberts. Each name would become synonymous with German submarine losses, each vessel a floating arsenal of technologies that turned the ocean's depths from sanctuary into killing ground. Oberleutnant zur See Hans-Joachim Hesse commanded U-boats for 3 years before encountering an American destroyer escort in the waters south of Greenland in May 1943. His war diary, recovered after his capture, contained a passage that would be circulated among Allied intelligence analysts for its raw honesty. We detected the destroyer on hydrophones at 8,000 meters, standard range for convoy escorts. I ordered silent running, reduced speed to 3 knots, descended to 120 meters depths that had allowed us to evade British escorts dozens of times. The destroyer came directly toward us, never wavering, never searching, as if she could see through the ocean itself. For 6 hours, she maintained contact. Every evasion maneuver, every course change, every depth adjustment she countered within minutes. When our batteries finally died and we were forced to surface, she was waiting exactly where we would emerge. It was not warfare, it was execution. Hesse's experience was not unique. By mid-1943, German submarine commanders were reporting encounters with American destroyers that seemed to possess supernatural abilities to maintain contact with submerged boats, regardless of evasion tactics. The explanation for this apparent supernatural ability lay in a revolution in underwater detection technology that American and British scientists had perfected through years of intensive research. Sonar systems aboard American destroyer escorts operated at frequencies and power levels that earlier Allied escorts could never achieve. The QHB sonar, standard equipment on destroyer escorts by 1943, could detect a submerged submarine at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards in favorable conditions. More importantly, it could maintain contact through the thermal layers and density variations that German commanders had previously used to break pursuit. The operators manning these systems were trained through intensive programs that taught them to distinguish between submarine echoes and false contacts from schools of fish, temperature gradients, or geological features. They learned to recognize the unique acoustic signature of each U-boat class. The Type 7C produced a slightly different echo than the Type 9D. The older boats had distinctive propeller sounds that differed from newer construction. This expertise transformed sonar from a crude detection tool into a precision instrument that could track individual submarines across dozens of miles of ocean. But sonar represented only the first layer of the technological advantage that made American destroyers so terrifying to U-boat crews. Kapitänleutnant Siegfried Koitschke commanded U-616 through 4 patrols before his encounter with USS Bori in October 1943. His post-war testimony to Allied interrogators revealed the psychological impact of facing American destroyer escorts. "We knew the British had sonar. We had developed tactics to counter it: silent running, thermal layer hiding, decoy devices. These tactics worked against British corvettes and destroyers. They were useless against the Americans. Their sonar seemed to penetrate every hiding place. We would descend below the thermal layer, and within minutes the pinging would resume, steady and relentless. We would lie on the bottom, shut down all machinery, barely breathing, and still they maintained contact. The psychological strain was unbearable. My crew began to crack after the 3rd hour of pursuit. Men were weeping quietly at their stations. The chief engineer reported that some sailors were praying aloud. We had gone from hunters to animals being run to ground, and everyone aboard knew we would not survive the next surfacing. Koitschke's submarine did eventually surface, her batteries depleted, her compressed air exhausted, her crew on the edge of psychological collapse. USS Bori's gunners destroyed U-616 in 17 minutes of concentrated fire. 15 of the 47 crew members survived to be pulled from the freezing Atlantic. There, interrogations revealed crews throughout the U-boat force were experiencing similar psychological deterioration when facing American destroyers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar represented the second technological advantage that made American destroyers uniquely deadly. Traditional depth charges required a destroyer to pass directly over a submarine's estimated position, dropping charges that detonated at preset depths. This forced the attacking ship to lose sonar contact at the critical moment of attack, allowing submarines to execute last-second evasion maneuvers. The Hedgehog system eliminated this vulnerability through elegant simplicity. 24 projectiles launched forward in an elliptical pattern ahead of the attacking destroyer. Each projectile contained 35 pounds of high explosive with a contact fuse. They only detonated if they struck the submarine's hull directly. This meant that any explosion confirmed a hit, and the firing ship maintained continuous sonar contact throughout the attack. German submarine commanders quickly learned that Hedgehog attacks were far more dangerous than conventional depth charge patterns. Oberleutnant Zur C. Friedrich Dietz survived a Hedgehog attack on U-707 in August 1943. His description of the experience, recorded during his captivity, captured the terror these weapons induced. "We heard the launch, 24 distinct splashes in rapid succession. Our hydrophone operator reported projectiles falling all around us. I ordered maximum speed, hard left rudder, attempting to evade the pattern. The first explosion came 6 seconds later, striking our stern. The detonation was different from depth charges, sharper, more concentrated. It punched through our pressure hull like a hammer through glass. The second hit came 3 seconds after the first, forward of the control room. Seawater erupted through both breaches simultaneously. We had perhaps 30 seconds from first impact to total flooding. 23 men made it to the surface. 21 did not. The combination of advanced sonar and Hedgehog mortars would have been devastating enough, but American destroyer escorts possessed a third advantage that completed their dominance: operational doctrine that emphasized relentless pursuit over quick kills. British anti-submarine tactics, shaped by years of convoy escort duty, prioritized protecting merchant ships over destroying submarines. A corvette that detected a U-boat would attack, but if the submarine escaped initial contact, the corvette would return to the convoy rather than pursue. American destroyer escorts, particularly those assigned to hunter-killer groups, operated under different orders. Maintain contact until the submarine is destroyed, regardless of how long pursuit requires. This difference in operational philosophy had profound psychological effects on German submariners. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Schroeder commanded U-667 during a patrol in July 1943, when his boat was detected by USS Thomas and USS Bostwick southwest of the Azores. His war diary documented a pursuit that lasted 38 hours. Hour 6. Batteries at 60%. Crew showing strain but maintaining discipline. American destroyers continue to maintain perfect contact despite our best evasion efforts. Hour 12. Batteries at 30%. We have tried every tactic: silent running, deep diving, course reversals, lying on the bottom. Nothing breaks their contact. The sonar pinging is constant, like being inside a bell that never stops ringing. Hour 18. Batteries at 15%. Chief Engineer reports we have perhaps 4 more hours of submerged operation. Some crew members are showing signs of panic. The carbon dioxide levels are rising, dangerously. Hour 24. Batteries at 8%. We must surface within the next 2 hours or suffocate. The Americans know this. They are simply waiting for our air to run out. Hour 30. Batteries dead, compressed air exhausted, carbon dioxide at critical levels. Men are losing consciousness. We must surface immediately. The Americans are still there, waiting. We never had a chance. U-667 surfaced and was destroyed by gunfire within 12 minutes. 7 survivors were rescued. Their interrogations revealed that this pattern extended pursuit until battery exhaustion forced surfacing was becoming standard American practice. The psychological warfare component of these extended pursuits was deliberate and devastating. American destroyer commanders understood that every hour spent submerged drained not just batteries but crew morale. The accumulation of carbon dioxide caused headaches, nausea, impaired judgment, and eventually unconsciousness. The temperature inside a submerged submarine would rise to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit as the boat's ventilation systems struggled to maintain breathable air. Men would collapse at their stations. Tempers would flare. The sounds of the pursuing destroyer's sonar would become a constant reminder that escape was impossible and destruction inevitable. Oberleutnant Sir C. Martin Wichmann survived such a pursuit when U-264 was hunted by USS Haverfield and USS Swenning for 42 hours in September 1943. His post-war memoir described the experience. By hour 30, we were no longer a military crew, but a collection of terrified men waiting to die. The sonar pinging had become part of our consciousness, a rhythm that measured the remaining minutes of our lives. Men were weeping openly. Others sat in complete silence, staring at nothing. Our executive officer had to physically strike one sailor who began screaming that he wanted to surrender. There was no surrender option. We were 150 meters below the surface with a dead battery. When we finally surfaced, I felt relief rather than fear. The waiting, the heat, the suffocating air, the endless pinging death by gunfire seemed merciful by comparison. The night surface engagement capabilities of American destroyers added another dimension to U-boat crews' fear. German submarine tactics had long relied on surfacing at night to charge batteries, ventilate the boat, and transit at higher speeds. Darkness had been a submarine's ally since the First World War. Escort vessels simply could not detect surfaced submarines reliably at night beyond visual range, which in darkness meant only a few hundred yards. American destroyer escorts shattered this assumption with radar systems that could detect a submarine's conning tower at ranges exceeding 10 miles, regardless of darkness, weather, or sea conditions. The SG Surface Search Radar, standard equipment on destroyer escorts by late 1942, operated at a frequency that German submarines could not detect with their existing radar warning receivers. U-boats would surface at night, believing themselves safe in the darkness, only to have American destroyers appear from beyond visual range, with perfect knowledge of the submarine's position, course, and speed. Kapitänleutnant Horst von Schroeter commanded U-109 when she was caught on the surface by USS Bori in November 1943. His account of the engagement, provided during interrogation, illustrated the shock of facing radar-equipped destroyers. "We surfaced at 0200 hours, and standard procedure for battery charging. Visibility was perhaps 200 meters in heavy rain. Sea state 5, wind force 6, terrible conditions, but we needed to charge. Our radar warning receiver showed nothing. We believed ourselves safe. The first indication of danger came when our bridge watch reported a shape emerging from the darkness at high speed, range 800 meters. By the time we attempted crash dive, the destroyer was already firing. Her first salvo landed within 50 meters. She had known our exact position before we ever saw her. We never had a moment to react. The technological superiority of American destroyers was matched by something equally demoralizing for U-boat crews: the quality and determination of the men who operated these vessels. German submarine commanders had grown accustomed to facing British and Canadian escort crews who, while brave and competent, were often exhausted from endless convoy duty, operating vessels that had been at sea for months without proper maintenance, with crews who had been pushed beyond reasonable endurance. American destroyer escort crews represented something entirely different. Fresh, well-trained sailors operating new ships with functioning equipment, led by officers who had studied anti-submarine warfare with scientific intensity and who approached each engagement not as a defensive necessity, but as an offensive opportunity. The average American destroyer escort crew had undergone 6 months of intensive training before their first operational deployment, twice as long as their British counterparts. This training emphasized not just technical proficiency, but tactical flexibility and aggressive pursuit. Officers studied probability theory to optimize search patterns. Sonar operators practiced for hundreds of hours, distinguishing between submarine echoes and false contacts. Gunnery crews drilled until they could engage surface targets in complete darkness using only radar guidance. The result was a level of operational excellence that German submariners had never encountered before. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins commanded USS Bori during one of the war's most legendary surface engagements with U-405 in November 1943. The after-action reports revealed not just superior technology, but superior tactical thinking and crew coordination that overwhelmed even experienced German commanders. When U-405 was forced to surface after depth charge damage prevented diving, her commander, Kapitänleutnant Rolf Mutzelberg, attempted to fight on the surface, a tactic that had worked against British corvettes in earlier engagements. What followed demonstrated the gulf between German expectations and American capabilities. Bori's radar had tracked the submarine throughout her attempted evasion. When U-405 surfaced, Hutchins had already positioned his ship for optimal engagement, his gun crews already trained on the submarine's predicted surfacing point. The German deck gun crew managed to fire 3 rounds before Bori's concentrated fire from 5-inch main batteries, 40mm anti-aircraft guns, and 20mm cannons simply swept them off the conning tower. The engagement lasted 47 minutes, during which Bori fired over 4,000 rounds of ammunition, maintained continuous radar contact, and maneuvered with such precision that U-405 never had an opportunity to dive or escape. When the vessels accidentally collided in the heavy seas, American sailors responded with such aggressive close-quarters combat that German survivors later reported feeling they were being boarded by pirates rather than engaging in conventional naval warfare. The industrial capacity behind American destroyer escort production added a strategic dimension to U-boat crews' growing fear. German submariners understood tonnage warfare. They had practiced it against Allied merchant shipping for 4 years. But by mid-1943, they began to realize they were on the losing end of that same equation. American shipyards were launching destroyer escorts at a pace that seemed impossible to German observers. The United States produced 453 destroyer escorts between 1943 and 1945, more than one every 2 days on average. German intelligence officers initially dismissed these production figures as Allied propaganda, believing no industrial system could sustain such output. U-boat commanders returning from patrol confirmed the numbers were accurate and conservative. Kapitänleutnant Herbert Werner, one of the few submarine commanders to survive the war, described the psychological impact of facing seemingly endless numbers of American destroyers. We would sink one destroyer escort, paying a terrible price in submarines lost, and 3 more would appear to take her place. We would return to port after a patrol and learn that while we were at sea, 20 new American escort vessels had entered service. The mathematics of our situation became inescapable. Germany was building 4 new U-boats per month to replace losses. America was building 15 destroyer escorts per month. We were being buried by sheer numbers, and every man in the U-boat force knew it. The acoustic homing, a torpedo carried by American destroyer escorts, represented perhaps the most psychologically devastating weapon in their arsenal. The Mark 24 mine, despite its deliberately misleading designation, was an acoustic torpedo that could home on the sound of a submarine's propellers with terrifying accuracy. U-boat commanders first encountered these weapons in mid-1943 and initially could not understand how aircraft-dropped torpedoes were hitting submarines that were executing proper evasion maneuvers. The German Navy had developed acoustic torpedoes of their own. The T-5 Zaunkönig had achieved some success against escort vessels, but German submariners assumed torpedoes dropped from aircraft would be conventional weapons requiring direct visual aim. The discovery that American aircraft could drop torpedoes that would actively search for and track submarines revolutionized underwater warfare and shattered whatever psychological confidence remained in U-boat crews. Oberleutnant zur See Joachim Dieker was serving as executive officer aboard U-603 when she became one of the first victims of the Mark 24. His survival and subsequent interrogation provided Allied intelligence with valuable insights into how U-boat crews perceived this weapon. We detected the aircraft at 5 kilometers, a standard range for our radar warning receiver. We crash-dived immediately, reaching 80 meters depth within 40 seconds faster than British aircraft could typically attack. We heard the splash of something entering the water, which we assumed was a depth charge that would detonate at shallow depth, well above our position. Instead, we heard a strange sound through the hydrophones, a high-pitched whine that grew steadily louder. Our hydrophone operator reported it was following us. I ordered hard right rudder, maximum speed, trying to evade what I now realized was some kind of homing weapon. The sound kept getting closer. We tried, cutting our engines, hoping it would lose track of us. The weapon continued closing. It struck our stern 70 seconds after entering the water. The explosion destroyed our propeller shafts and rudder. We sank to 200 meters before emergency procedures stopped the descent. 12 men died in the initial flooding. The rest of us endured 6 hours at crushing depth before compressed air systems failed, and we had to attempt emergency surfacing. Only 7 of us made it to the surface alive. The integration of aircraft with destroyer operations created a multi-dimensional threat environment that U-boat commanders simply could not counter. Traditional submarine warfare had been essentially 2-dimensional submarines operated in the vertical plane of depth, while surface ships operated on the horizontal plane of the ocean's surface. A submarine could evade surface vessels by diving, and surface vessels could force submarines to remain submerged by maintaining contact. This balance had defined submarine warfare since its inception. American destroyer escorts working in coordination with aircraft from escort carriers shattered this 2-dimensional framework entirely. A submarine that dived to evade destroyers would be attacked by aircraft dropping acoustic torpedoes or depth charges. A submarine that surfaced to escape aircraft would be engaged by destroyers with radar-directed gunfire. There was no safe depth, no safe time, no tactical option that did not expose the submarine to lethal attack. Kapitänleutnant Wilhelm von Trotha commanded U-306 during a patrol in August 1943 when his boat was caught between aircraft from USS Card and destroyer escorts from the same hunter-killer group. His war diary entry for August 11th captured the impossible tactical situation. Detected aircraft at dawn. Crash dived to 100 meters. Aircraft dropped pattern of acoustic torpedoes. Evaded by cutting engines and drifting. Destroyers. Arrived and established sonar contact. Remained submerged for 8 hours until batteries critical. Attempted to surface after dark. Aircraft were waiting. They had maintained station overhead for the entire period. Forced to dive again with batteries at 12%. Destroyers immediately re-established contact. No tactical options remain. Cannot dive batteries dead. Cannot surface aircraft waiting. Cannot fight ammunition expended. Cannot run fuel nearly exhausted. This is not warfare but systematic execution. The training and doctrine that American destroyer crews brought to anti-submarine warfare reflected a fundamental philosophical difference from their British counterparts. British anti-submarine warfare had evolved from defensive necessity. Convoys needed protection, escorts provided that protection, and submarine contacts were attacked when they threatened the convoy. American doctrine, particularly for hunter-killer groups, approached submarine hunting as an anti-submarine offensive operation with the singular goal of destroying every U-boat encountered regardless of other considerations. This offensive mindset manifested in tactics that German commanders found shockingly aggressive. American destroyers would pursue sonar contacts for days if necessary, coordinating with other vessels to maintain continuous pressure, calling in aircraft support to attack from multiple axes, and using advanced weapons like hedgehog mortars to maintain contact during attacks. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was profound. They were no longer engaging in tactical duels with escort vessels, but being systematically hunted by dedicated killers who would never stop, never tire, and never lose contact. Oberleutnant zur See Hans Becker commanded U-219 during a 48-hour pursuit by USS Thomas, USS Bostwick, and aircraft from USS Santee in September 1943. His post-capture testimony revealed the mental deterioration that occurred during extended pursuits. Hour 12. Crew morale declining but maintaining discipline. Americans show no sign of breaking off pursuit. Hour 24. Battery at 35%. Carbon dioxide levels rising. Chief engineer recommends surfacing within 12 hours. Americans continue perfect sonar contact. Hour 36. Battery at 15%. Multiple crew members showing symptoms of carbon dioxide poisoning, confusion, headaches, nausea. Americans brought in aircraft to drop sonobuoys, creating acoustic net we cannot escape. Hour 48. Battery dead. Air unbreathable. Executive officer unconscious. 5 sailors in medical emergency. Must surface or entire crew will suffocate. Americans waiting at surface with 3 destroyers and 2 aircraft. They knew exactly when we would have to surface. They had calculated our battery life, our air supply, our options. We were not fighting a battle. We were being processed through a system designed to kill submarines with industrial efficiency. The night action capabilities of American destroyers eliminated what had been U-boats' primary survival tactic operating on the surface under cover of darkness. For 4 years, German submarines had used nighttime surface operations to charge batteries, transit at higher speeds, and attack convoys with relative impunity. British escorts, while equipped with sonar for submerged detection, had limited capability to detect surfaced submarines at night beyond visual range. American destroyer escorts with SG surface search radar could detect a submarine's conning tower at ranges exceeding 12 miles in total darkness, through rain, fog, or any weather conditions. The psychological impact of this capability cannot be overstated. Darkness had been a submarine's fundamental ally since undersea warfare began, and American technology eliminated this advantage completely. Kapitänleutnant Erich Topp, one of Germany's top submarine aces with 34 ships sunk, encountered American radar-equipped destroyers during his final patrol in April 1944. His experience illustrated how completely radar had transformed night surface operations. We surfaced at 0300 hours, calculated to be the darkest period before dawn. Visibility was perhaps 100 meters in heavy fog. We believed ourselves completely invisible. We were conducting standard battery charging when our radar warning receiver suddenly activated a frequency we had never encountered before. Before we could react, star shells illuminated our position from a destroyer we had not seen. She was 8,000 meters away, beyond any possible visual detection range. Yet she had known our exact position, course, and speed. Her first salvo landed within 20 meters, while we were still attempting crash dive procedures. We survived that encounter only because her gunner's aim was slightly off in the rough seas. But the experience broke something in my crew. They realized that darkness no longer offered protection. There was nowhere to hide, no time that was safe. The ocean had become transparent to American technology. The depth charge patterns employed by American destroyers reflected sophisticated understanding of submarine behavior and vulnerabilities that went far beyond simple saturation attacks. British depth charge doctrine typically involved dropping patterns of 5 to 10 charges set at various depths, hoping to catch the submarine somewhere within the pattern. American destroyers used calculated patterns based on sonar tracking data, submarine evasion probabilities, and the physics of underwater shock waves. These patterns were designed not just to sink submarines directly, but to damage enough systems to force surfacing a more reliable kill method than hoping for a direct hit at depth. The Mark 9 depth charge, standard American anti-submarine weapon by 1943, contained 300 pounds of high, explosive 50% more than earlier designs. Blast effects at 200 feet from detonation could crack a submarine's pressure hull. At 100 feet, the shock wave would shatter instruments, knock men unconscious, and rupture pipes throughout the boat. Direct hits or near misses within 50 feet would catastrophically destroy the pressure hull, killing the entire crew within seconds. Oberleutnant Zur C. Friedrich Guggenberger survived a depth charge attack by USS Benson that killed 17 of his crew aboard U-817 in October 1943. His description of the attack's effects revealed the devastating power of American depth charges. The first pattern detonated at our depth, approximately 150 meters. The explosions felt like being inside a steel drum being struck by sledgehammers. Light bulbs shattered. Gauge glass exploded. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The second pattern was closer, perhaps 75 meters. The entire boat flexed like it was made of rubber. Rivets popped from interior plates. Small leaks appeared in dozens of locations. Men were bleeding from their ears and noses. The third pattern cracked our pressure hull in 2 places. Major flooding in the forward torpedo room. We knew we had minutes before the boat would sink beyond recovery depth. When we surfaced, expecting to be destroyed by gunfire, we almost welcomed it. The terror of dying slowly at depth from pressure hull failure and flooding was worse than the quick death gunfire would bring. The cumulative psychological toll of facing American destroyers manifested in ways that German naval command had never anticipated and could not effectively counter. U-boat crews who survived encounters with American destroyer escorts returned to base, fundamentally changed, withdrawn, haunted, displaying symptoms that modern psychiatrists would recognize as combat trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. Medical officers at U-boat bases in France and Norway began reporting alarming rates of psychological breakdown among returning crews, particularly those who had experienced extended depth charge attacks or prolonged pursuits by American vessels. The German Navy had no formal psychiatric support system for submarine crews, no recognition that the unique stresses of submarine warfare required specialized mental health intervention. Men who showed signs of psychological distress were often accused of cowardice or malingering, creating additional shame that prevented others from seeking help. The result was a steady degradation of crew quality as experienced submariners reached their psychological breaking points, and new, inexperienced crews went to sea already terrified by stories from survivors. Kapitänleutnant Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, witnessed this deterioration firsthand when he received replacement crew members in November 1943. The men who came aboard were boys, most under 20 years old, with perhaps 8 weeks of training. But worse than their inexperience was their fear. They had heard the stories from survivors, tales of American destroyers that could find submarines anywhere, of pursuits that lasted days, of depth charges that cracked boats open like eggs. Before we even left port, I could see terror in their eyes. One young torpedo man asked me directly if we would survive the patrol. I could not lie to him. The statistics were clear: more than 60% of U-boats never returned from patrol by late 1943. These were not warriors going to battle, they were condemned men walking to execution. The adaptation attempts by German submarine command revealed the desperation of an organization that understood it was losing the technological and tactical battle, but lacked the industrial capacity or scientific resources to counter American advantages. New tactics were constantly promulgated: longer periods submerged, stricter radio silence, evasive routing away from known destroyer patrol areas, even instructions to fight on the surface rather than dive when caught by radar-equipped destroyers. None of these tactical modifications addressed the fundamental problem. American destroyers possessed multiple overlapping advantages in detection, weapons, crew quality, and operational doctrine that could not be countered through tactical innovation alone. The schnorkel breathing apparatus, introduced in early 1944, allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining at periscope depth, theoretically eliminating the vulnerability of surface battery charging. In practice, schnorkel-equipped boats proved almost as vulnerable as conventional submarines. The device created a distinctive radar signature that American destroyers could detect. It reduced maximum submerged speed to 6 knots, making evasion impossible. It could not be used in rough seas without risking engine damage from water intake. Most devastatingly, it did nothing to counter sonar detection or acoustic torpedoes, the primary American submarine-killing technologies. Oberleutnant Zur See Wolfgang Luth commanded one of the first schnorkel-equipped boats in combat operations against American destroyers in March 1944. His assessment of the technology was brutally honest. The schnorkel allows us to remain submerged longer, which simply means we spend more time being hunted before inevitable destruction. American sonar penetrates to any depth we can survive. Their acoustic torpedoes home on our propeller noise, whether we are at periscope depth or 200 meters down. The schnorkel is not a solution, but a delay of the inevitable. We are still being hunted by technologically superior forces we cannot evade or counter. The personal accounts from U-boat commanders who faced American destroyers repeatedly throughout 1943 and 1944 reveal a progression, from confidence to uncertainty to outright terror, that paralleled the broader strategic collapse of German submarine warfare. Early patrol reports from spring 1943 mention American destroyers as simply another type of escort vessel, dangerous but manageable through proper tactics and experienced seamanship. By summer 1943, reports begin noting unusual persistence and accuracy in American attacks, though commanders still believed they could evade through skilled maneuvering. By autumn 1943, war diaries explicitly state that American destroyers possess capabilities that German training and tactics cannot counter. By winter 1943 to 1944, reports describe American destroyers in terms that border on supernatural vessels that appear from nowhere, maintain impossible contact, predict every evasion attempt, and attack with weapons that seem to defy physical laws. This progression was not limited to junior or inexperienced commanders, but affected even the most decorated U-boat aces. Korvettenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, Germany's top submarine ace with 44 ships sunk, was captured in March 1941 before American destroyer escorts entered service in large numbers. During his lengthy captivity, he was able to debrief returning U-boat commanders who had faced American destroyers. His assessment, recorded in post-war memoirs, acknowledged the completeness of the technological revolution. The commanders I spoke with during my imprisonment described a type of warfare I had never experienced. In my combat period, from 1939 through 1941, submarines were genuinely difficult to detect and attack. A skilled commander with good crew could evade most escort vessels through proper tactics. The men who faced American hunter-killer groups described something entirely different, an enemy who possessed every advantage simultaneously, and who pursued with relentless determination until the submarine was destroyed. It was not warfare but systematic extermination based on overwhelming technological superiority. The final year of the Atlantic U-boat campaign, from spring 1944 through May 1945, saw the complete dissolution of German submarine effectiveness, not through any single catastrophic defeat, but through the accumulated weight of constant losses against American destroyers and their associated technologies. Young commanders with minimal training led inexperienced crews into combat against American forces that had refined their anti-submarine techniques to near perfection through 2 years of continuous operations. The loss rates became statistically certainty rather than possibility. Over 75% of U-boats that sailed from Norwegian bases in early 1945 never returned. Crew members writing final letters home before departures no longer spoke of glory or victory, but simply tried to prepare their families for inevitable death notices. The psychological preparation for certain death created its own pathology among U-boat crews, a fatalistic resignation that actually decreased combat effectiveness as men lost the will to fight an unwinnable battle. Oberleutnant Zur See Helmut Mansek commanded U-763 during one of the final U-boat patrols of the war in April 1945. His boat was detected by American destroyers 3 days after leaving port and destroyed after a 6-hour pursuit. Only 5 crew members survived. During post-war interviews, Mansek described the mental state of his crew during their brief patrol. Every man aboard knew we would not return. The statistics were absolute. 3 out of 4 boats never came back. We had perhaps the most advanced submarine Germany could build, Type 7C with schnorkel, acoustic torpedoes, radar warning receivers. None of it mattered. American destroyers detected us within 72 hours of departure. They maintained perfect contact through every evasion attempt. They coordinated with aircraft that dropped acoustic torpedoes we could not evade. When we finally surfaced with dead batteries and exhausted air, 3 destroyers were waiting in perfect firing positions. They had known exactly where we would surface and when. The entire patrol, from departure to destruction, was predetermined. We were not conducting military operations but participating in our own executions. The broader strategic impact of American destroyer dominance extended far beyond the statistics of U-boats sunk or crews lost. The fundamental mission of the U-boat force to sever Atlantic supply lines and starve Britain into submission became impossible to execute once American destroyers and associated anti-submarine forces achieved operational superiority in mid-1943. German submarines could no longer maintain station in convoy routes. They could no longer operate in wolf packs, coordinated by radio communication. They could no longer surface to attack at night. They could no longer refuel at sea from supply submarines. Every operational requirement for effective submarine warfare had been negated by American technological and tactical superiority. The result was submarines that could barely reach operational areas before being detected and destroyed, that achieved minimal sinkings even when they encountered targets, and that survived only by hiding rather than attacking the exact opposite of their intended offensive role. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force and later Supreme Commander of the German Navy, faced the impossible task of maintaining submarine operations in the face of overwhelming American anti-submarine superiority, while simultaneously acknowledging that continued operations served no strategic purpose beyond tying down Allied anti-submarine forces. His war diary entries from late 1944 reveal the psychological toll of sending men to certain death for no realistic hope of strategic effect. Every boat that sails has perhaps a 20% chance of returning. Every man who goes to sea has a 75% chance of dying. We continue operations because the Führer demands it, because withdrawal would free Allied anti-submarine forces for other duties, because surrender of the Atlantic would acknowledge total defeat. But I know, and the commanders know, and the crews know we are sacrificing these men for no military purpose beyond delaying the inevitable end. The technological lessons learned from American destroyer superiority influenced naval warfare for generations after World War II ended. The integration of radar, sonar, advanced weapons, and coordinated air-surface operations became foundational doctrine for all modern navies. The understanding that industrial capacity and scientific advancement could create decisive military advantages that tactics and courage could not overcome shaped Cold War naval strategy and continues to influence military planning today. The specific capabilities that made American destroyers so devastating, persistent tracking through advanced sensors, weapons that could attack while maintaining contact, coordination between multiple platforms, and crews trained to scientific precision became the template for anti-submarine warfare throughout the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st. But perhaps more importantly, the psychological impact of facing technologically superior forces that could not be countered through traditional military virtues of courage, skill, and determination created a fundamental shift in how naval forces understood modern warfare. The German U-boat crews who faced American destroyers experienced firsthand the obsolescence of individual heroism against systematic technological advantage, a lesson that proved as important strategically as any particular weapon or sensor system. The Cold War's anti-submarine warfare, built around nuclear submarines hunted by sophisticated surface and air forces, was direct descendant of the techniques proven against U-boats in the Atlantic. The psychological factors that broke German submarine crews, the stress of being constantly tracked, the impossibility of escape, the certainty of death if detected became deliberate design criteria for modern anti-submarine warfare systems intended to achieve similar psychological effects against potential adversaries. The human cost of American destroyer superiority against U-boats remains staggering even 80 years later. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 75% that exceeded even infantry losses on the Eastern Front. The young men who crewed U-boats in the war's final 2 years sailed knowing their chances of survival were minimal, facing American forces that possessed every advantage and pursued with relentless determination. The psychological trauma of survivors haunted them for decades. Nightmares of depth charges, phantom sounds of sonar pinging, survivors' guilt over lost crewmates, and the knowledge that their terror had been justified by the systematic efficiency with which American destroyers had hunted them to near extinction. The veterans who gathered in post-war years spoke quietly of their fear of American destroyers, acknowledging what they could not admit during the war, that they had faced forces they could neither comprehend nor counter, that their training and tactics had been obsolete before they ever sailed, and that their survival owed more to luck than skill. The accounts of U-boat commanders like Herbert Werner, Wolfgang Luth, and Peter Kremer, preserved in memoirs and interviews, and consistently emphasize not the tactical details of engagements, but the psychological horror of facing an enemy who possessed supernatural-seeming abilities to detect, track, and destroy submarines, regardless of evasion attempts or defensive measures. These accounts serve as testimony to the revolution in naval warfare that American destroyers represented, a revolution that transformed undersea combat from a contest of skill and courage into a scientific exercise in detection and elimination, where the technologically inferior force had no realistic chance of survival, regardless of their determination or tactical proficiency. The legacy of American destroyer dominance over German U-boats extends beyond military history into broader lessons about technological warfare, industrial capacity, and the limitations of traditional military virtues against systematic material superiority. The U-boat crews who sailed against American destroyers in 1943 and 1944 experienced a type of warfare that would become increasingly common in modern conflicts combat, where one side possesses such overwhelming advantages in sensors, weapons, coordination, and industrial support that traditional military factors like leadership, training, and morale become largely irrelevant to outcomes. The fear these German submariners felt was not cowardice, but rational recognition that they faced forces they could not effectively resist, and death that was mathematically probable, regardless of their actions. Their story serves as testament to the cold efficiency of modern technological warfare and as memorial to the 30,000 men who died in a struggle, decided not by their courage or skill, but by the industrial and scientific capacity of their enemies. The destroyers that hunted them to extinction were not just weapons, but instruments of a new type of warfare, where victory belonged to systems rather than individuals, where technological advantage determined outcomes more surely than tactical brilliance, and where the ocean itself became transparent to forces capable of detecting, tracking, and destroying submarines with scientific precision that left no room for the romantic notion that skilled commanders could overcome material disadvantage through determination and cunning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.